So yeah, I don't know about anybody else, but I really needed to hear these teachings this weekend. The Dharma has been such a powerful force in my life, and I honestly don't even want to think about where I'd be without it. And the thing is that the teachings are there, and the Abbey is there because of all the people that have come before me, before you, people who have benefited from them and made a contribution to ensure that the teachings and that the Abbey continued. So before Venerable joins us, I just wanted to encourage everybody. I feel like I should have Chloe with me too after all the videos that we do. Yeah, so before Venerable joins us, I just wanted to encourage everybody to think about that, about how you've benefited from the Dharma and how the teachings have been available to us, like everyone else, as the result of causes and conditions, and how we have the opportunity to contribute to those causes and conditions and make sure the Dharma is there not only for ourselves, but for others in the days and weeks and months and decades and even centuries to come. So after the teachings today, if you're so inspired, jump on the Sravasti Abbey website. There's so many options. Of course, we're excited about the Buddha Hall, but there's also the general fund. There's the medical fund. Lots of different opportunities. So yeah, so share what you can, and let's keep practicing. Let's keep transforming our own minds and benefiting the world around us. And just wanted to say thank you to everybody who participated this weekend. Again, I really needed this, and I just appreciate each and every one of you being here. So thank you.
So thank you, Heather, and thank you, Venerable Chuni. So let's begin as usual with the prayers.
I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. Ayata mune mune maha mune soha. Tayata mune mune maha mune soha. Tayata mune mune maha mune soha.
Okay, so let's take a few more moments to make sure our motivation is a good one. In case you don't already have a positive motivation, we can always bring one into our mind. And one way to do that is remember that all living beings are basically the same in wanting to be happy, wanting to have good experiences, and wanting to not suffer or have any bad experiences. And Buddhism says that everyone deserves happiness and no one should have to suffer, because we all have Buddha nature, pure nature of our mind, and the causes of suffering, afflictions, and karma are not permanent fixtures in our mind. They're adventitious, meaning they can be removed. Every being has the ability, the potential to become free of suffering and its causes, and to go all the way to full awakening, the state of a Buddha. Just try to feel how wonderful that would be. And see if you can align your mind with that beautiful goal, and have the aspiration that whatever you do, especially right now, participating in this this session, this talk and meditation, that it will help you to develop your abilities to achieve this goal, to achieve awakening for the benefit of all beings, helping all other living beings reach that state as well. Okay. So I would like to begin by returning to the question that came up yesterday from Tukje, and probably other people have that question as well, about grief, whether grief is a affliction or not. So I did ask Geshe-la, Geshe Tenzin Chodak, also known as Geshe Dado, who lives here at the Abbey. And he said that it's not among the list of the 6 root and 20 secondary afflictions that we usually study in the mental factors. But this is not considered an exhaustive list, meaning there are other afflictions that aren't on that list. And then he mentioned another list of 70 plus mental factors that are explained in the commentary on Abhidharmakosha in the section on afflictions in the 5th chapter. I did have a look at that text, and I didn't see grief mentioned in it. But I had a look in another book this morning. This is a book called Science and Philosophy in the Buddhist Classics, Volume 2, The Mind. Some of you may have this book. It's quite thorough in looking at all the various types of mental factors from different texts. And just quickly, before the class started this morning, I did find grief mentioned on a list of 24 secondary mental afflictions, which are in a commentary on Abhidharmakosha. That was the text that Geshe-la mentioned. And yeah, so, this is going into some of the classic Indian texts from many centuries ago. And yeah, so this list of 24 mental factors, which are secondary afflictions, and yeah, it does mention grief. The last few are sorrow, pain, grief, and despair. So I'll try to look further in this book. There may be other references to grief as well. So that shows that, yeah, at least in some of the classic Indian texts, this grief is considered an affliction. But again, it's not on the usual list that we study. So maybe it's not such an important affliction as others. And then somebody mentioned yesterday being grief being a near enemy of compassion. So the book, it's volume 5 in the series that Venerable Children has been working on, the Library of Wisdom and Compassion. Volume 5 is called In Praise of Great Compassion. And in that book, it says, compassion's near enemy is personal distress or grief based on worldly life. This grief is the sadness and distress felt when we or those we care about cannot get what we want. It may be sorrow over past frustrations or present disappointments. The grief is similar to compassion in that both have an element of sorrow due to others' misery. So, in some cases, grief may look like compassion, but it's not really compassion. So we need to recognize the difference between them. His Holiness often talks about this too. He doesn't use the word grief, but personal distress. He says there's a difference between compassion and personal distress. So, for example, if a loved one is ill and experiencing a lot of difficulties and suffering and getting close to death, then we probably feel quite upset about that. And probably part of it is genuine compassion, because compassion is explained as the wish for others to not suffer. So when we see somebody suffering and we're moved by that, touched by that, and really wish them to be free of suffering, then that's compassion. But I think if we look carefully at our mind and what's going on in our mind at that time, if we're honest with ourselves, we might also recognize personal distress. Because, that person is someone that we love, we care about, someone we're close to. And, probably in normal circumstances, we experience a lot of joy, a lot of happiness in our relationship with that person. And if we're honest with ourselves, there's an element of selfishness in that. They make me happy. They make me feel good. They give me attention. Yeah. So our ego and our self-centeredness get, thrilled by the good feelings we have in relation to that person. But then when this person is in pain, suffering, and they're probably not able to give us much happiness in those circumstances, and then we see them suffering, and that makes us unhappy. Okay, and so we don't like that feeling. We don't like being unhappy. So I think if we carefully examine our mind, then we'll probably recognize an element of self-centeredness there, like I'm not getting what I want. I'm not getting the happiness, the good feelings that I want. And instead I'm getting, these unpleasant feelings, which is what I don't want. So I think that's, it's probably not the whole of our experience. And so there's probably a lot of different things going on, like genuine compassion, really concerned about this person and wanting to relieve their suffering. but also some, self-centered distress that we're not getting what we want, what we need from this person. And it's probably difficult to acknowledge that, we don't want to, have those kind of feelings. We don't want to admit that those feelings are there, but I think it's important to be honest with ourselves, because if those feelings are there and we just ignore them or deny them and pretend they're not there, then we won't be able to work on them. We won't be able to overcome them. So it is important to be honest and willing to acknowledge that, mixed within our feelings of love and compassion and concern for another person, that there is self-centeredness and attachment. That's really what attachment is all about. We get attached to people and things that make us feel good, that bring us happiness, that fulfill our needs and wishes. And that's, self-centered. So we do need to be able to recognize the difference between genuine, unconditional love and compassion and this state of mind, which is like self-centered attachment. And if you do notice that in your mind, don't beat yourself up and don't think, oh, I'm horrible, I'm bad, I'm so selfish and so on. that isn't helpful. And you're not alone. you know as long as we're ordinary people, ordinary sentient beings, then we're not enlightened, we're not free of ego and attachment and these other afflictions. So we have to acknowledge that and remember that these these afflicted states of mind are not permanent. They're not who we really are. They're left over from past lives where our mind has been caught up with ignorance and other delusions from beginningless time. And so we just inherited those from our past lives, and we can overcome them, just like the Buddha, just like many other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and beings who followed the path. They were able to overcome these and be free from these. We can do that too. So we need to, encourage ourselves about our potential, our possibility, and be kind, be compassionate to oneself rather than beating yourself up. And so I think, whenever there are feelings of grief in your mind, it's helpful to explore what is going on in your mind and try to recognize. There's probably a lot of different things. I don't think grief is one single experience that's always the same. Like that list of the 7 stages of grief that we looked at yesterday. So, all of those come under the umbrella of grief, but there's varied experiences in there, like, denial, guilt, anger, and then later on hope. Okay, so at least in the Western model, those are all part of this experience of grief. And if we watch our experience, we'll probably notice that as well. Our feelings of grief over the loss of a loved one probably shift and change, and different things come up. And some of them might be afflicted, and some of them might be not. Yeah, we might suddenly have this incredible sense of compassion for other people who are experiencing grief and think, wow, now I know. I mean, that's something that I said to myself when for me, the strongest experience I had of grief was when my mother passed away. It was there were moments where I was just overwhelmed. I couldn't even practice. But I said to myself, oh, the good side of this is now I know what grief is like, because I never felt like that before. And so now I understand what other people feel. I know that experience that everybody, most people go through. And so now I'm in a better position to understand other people when they are experiencing grief. And then I can have more compassion and empathy and ability to help them. And so, that kind of made me feel good. There's a positive side of this, however painful it may be. Some good will come out of it. Yeah. So, yeah, within our experiences of grief, there could be a variety of different things. So, I think we need to use mindfulness, really pay attention to what's going on, and introspective awareness, which is able to pick apart the different elements of what's going on in our mind, and then see if we can recognize which aspects are um, afflictive, deluded, like attachment or anger. And I was also thinking about distorted conceptions. You may have heard this teaching. Venerable teaches it a lot. The four distorted conceptions that sentient beings are subject to: grasping what's impermanent as permanent, and grasping dukkha, suffering, as pleasurable, grasping what is unattractive, like human bodies, as beautiful, and grasping what is lacking a self as having a self. So these are explained, I think, quite extensively in volume 3, Samsara, Nirvana, Buddha, Nature, which Venerable's been teaching for quite a while now on Friday nights. And those distorted conceptions, I think, can be involved in grief, especially the first one. We wanted that person to be there forever. We expected them to always be there, as if they were permanent. And that's simply going against reality. The reality is everyone and everything that arises from causes and conditions is by nature impermanent, changing every moment, and eventually will pass away. And so not accepting that, but trying to cling to that person. Oh, I want them to be there. I don't want them to be gone. That's a manifestation of that distorted conception, grasping what is impermanent as permanent. And these, I was wondering if those are afflictions or not. And I looked it up in, again, volume 3. Volume 3, Samsara, Nirvana, Buddha, Nature, on page 74, where it's going through different types of ignorance. This list of about 9 different types of ignorance. And number 8 on that list is these four distorted conceptions. So they are a type of ignorance. They're examples of ignorance, and ignorance is always an affliction. And so if we examine our mind, look at our mind, we might be able to recognize these distorted conceptions. And so again, those are afflictions. And so, yeah, whatever afflictions we notice in our mind, in what we call grief, this process of grieving, if we really are concerned about overcoming our afflictions, since they are the main cause of suffering, then we look for the antidotes and work on applying the antidotes. But we need to be compassionate and patient with ourselves, because it takes a long time to work on afflictions. And in fact, we can't really eliminate afflictions or get rid of them until we have the direct realization of emptiness. Until that time, we can apply antidotes, we can reduce them, we can manage them, but they won't go away. They're going to keep coming back until we have this direct realization of emptiness. So knowing that, we shouldn't be discouraged and think, oh no. But, we have the ability to understand emptiness. There's lots of teachings, lots of books. The last 3 volumes of this series, Library of Wisdom and Compassion, volumes 7, 8, and 9, they're all about emptiness. So we can read those books, study those teachings, and contemplate them, and gradually develop our understanding of emptiness. And eventually we will get there. We'll get the actual realization of it. And that's the way to eliminate the afflictions once and for all. And even if we don't manage to do that in this lifetime, I mean, it would be great if we could do it in this lifetime, but maybe that's a little high to achieve. But my teachers say whatever effort we make to understand emptiness in this lifetime will carry over into future lives and will make it easier for us when we again meet the Dharma, learn, practice. We have a head start for people who never heard about emptiness before. So yeah, any effort we make to understand emptiness will be helpful. And Venerable Chunni mentioned that yesterday in the discussion period, somebody mentioned that doing contemplation of death isn't so helpful when they're feeling depressed. And I agree that we need to take care of our mind. In fact, there was one book, I think it may have been the book called Healing Anger. In that book, the Dalai Lama said that if you're someone who tends to get depressed, then it's better not to think about suffering too much. Which I felt I was very relieved when I read that, because in Tibetan Buddhism, well, I think all traditions of Buddhism, there's a lot of talk about suffering and all the different types of suffering, and we really have to meditate on these and so on. And I'm someone who has experienced a lot of depression in my life, and it's quite hard. So I was really relieved when I read what His Holiness said. And it makes complete sense. The point is not to become depressed. The whole point of contemplating suffering is to get energized, to do something about it, to get ourselves free of suffering and the causes of suffering, get ourselves to liberation, get ourselves to enlightenment so we can help others. But if it has that effect on us of making us feel depressed and kind of helpless and then losing our energy, then that's wrong. That's not the point. So if we do notice that's happening, if we do notice ourselves feeling depressed about suffering, about death, and so on and so forth, we need to do something about that to uplift our mind, to bring our mind out of that state of depression. So remind ourselves of something positive, like precious human nature, precious human life, and Buddha nature, that is definitely possible for every single one of us to be free of our suffering and reach awakening. So we need to contemplate things that will uplift us, bring us out of depression. So we have to watch our mind, watch our experience. And just like with our health, if you got a cold, you need to take certain medicine. If you have a headache, you take other medicine. So we need to apply remedies to our mind according to what is going on. Okay, so let's continue. There's one last slide, and this is all about different methods we can use for transforming problems into the path. And I thought to just start with a story. You may have heard this story before, but it's really lovely to illustrate, that problems can be transformed into the path to nirvana and awakening. So at the time of the Buddha, there was a woman named Kisa Gotami, and she was married, and they had a child. And it sounds like her marriage wasn't completely happy and satisfying, but she was so happy to have this baby, this little child. And she adored her child and took very good care of it. But it so happened that the child became ill and died, and she was just totally devastated, totally overcome with grief. And sounds like she got a little imbalance. So she started, with her baby, this, dead baby in her arms. She started going around the village where she lived and asking people, please, can you bring my baby back to life? Can you, do something for my baby? And everybody was like, sorry, there's nothing we can do. But people felt very compassionate. And finally somebody said, why don't you go and see the Buddha? I think the Buddha was staying nearby. So she went to where the Buddha was staying and approached the Buddha and asked him, can you please, bring my baby back to life? And he replied very skillfully. He said, I will help you, but I want you to bring me some mustard seeds. And you need to get these mustard seeds from a house where nobody has ever died. So she was really happy and went off and started, knocking on doors and asking people if they have mustard seeds. And everybody has mustard seeds because that's like, a common ingredient in Indian food. But then she asked, oh, but has anyone died in this house? And every family would say, oh yeah, we lost a child, we lost a grandpa, we lost this person. And so going from house to house to house, she wasn't able to find any house where there hadn't been a death. And so it dawned on her that, yeah, death is something that happens everywhere to every family. So she returned to the Buddha and accepted the death of her child and buried the child, and then asked to be a disciple of the Buddha. And in that very lifetime, under the Buddha's guidance, she was able to attain nirvana. She became an arhat, someone who's completely free of all suffering and the causes of suffering, and able to abide forever in a state of peace. And there's a few other stories as well. Buddha helping someone who was experiencing strong grief. So these can give us hope that even though grief is a very painful experience, with the right tools, methods, strategies, we can transform this painful experience into the spiritual path. And so there's a lot of these methods explained in Buddhism, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, under what's called Lojong, thought transformation. And these tools can be used for any kind of problem we have, not just grief, but anything, being sick, having a headache, and so on and so forth. So let's look at these. Where's my book? Okay, so one is mindfulness. And that's a pretty well-known practice nowadays. There's even apps that help you practice mindfulness and so on. And so when we do face a problem, some difficult or painful experience, our normal tendency may be to get overwhelmed with disturbing thoughts and emotions. And, it's difficult to think straight. Your mind just totally caught up in the suffering and the negative thoughts. And what some people sometimes do is try to escape from them, escape from these painful experiences into taking drugs or alcohol or entertainment or work or food or whatever. We just want to get away from this pain. But those methods don't usually help, and sometimes they just create more suffering, more problems. So it's important to understand that, those avenues are not helpful. And in fact, there's this one teaching where the Buddha said that this is like shooting ourselves with a second arrow. When we have a problem, some painful experience, it's like one arrow that's hit us. And then when we react unwisely, unskillfully, that's like shooting ourselves with another arrow. Or maybe we have this expression, shooting yourself in the foot. I don't know if that's appropriate, but it's like not helpful and just making things worse. And also they just increase and strengthen unhelpful habits that don't bring us in the direction of liberation and enlightenment, but just keep us in samsara. And so mindfulness is a helpful tool. And I just like to read, there's this book called No Mud, No Lotus by Thich Nhat Hanh. Very, very nice little book. And the subtitle is The Art of Transforming Suffering. So I really recommend that. He's got a lot of wonderful advice in there on how to transform problems into the path. So here in this book on page 17, he says, mindfulness, mindfulness is the best way to be with our suffering without being overwhelmed by it. Mindfulness is the capacity to dwell in the present moment, to know what's happening in the here and now. With mindfulness, you can recognize the presence of the suffering in you and in the world. And it's with that same energy that you tenderly embrace the suffering. By being aware of your in-breath and out-breath, you generate the energy of mindfulness so you can continue to cradle the suffering. Practitioners of mindfulness can help and support each other in recognizing, embracing, and transforming suffering. With mindfulness, we are no longer afraid of pain. We can even go further and make good use of suffering to generate the energy of understanding and compassion that heals us, and we can help others to heal and be happy as well. So that's one practice, if you're familiar with mindfulness, to use that in dealing with the suffering. And second is refuge. So as we saw on the list of the stages of grief, people often feel alone, isolated, maybe even abandoned with their grief and their loss. And according to Buddhism, especially Mahayana Buddhism, the teachings on refuge say that in reality, we're never alone. There are always many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas nearby, aware of us, aware of what's going on in our mind, our suffering, and feeling total unconditional love and compassion for us, and are totally dedicated to helping us, to guiding us out of our suffering and to awakening. So that may be hard to believe, because we might say, but where are they? I don't see them. Well, they say that, to be able to see Buddhas, we need to do some purification, clear up our mind. And when our mind is more clear and pure, then we will be able to have direct perception and direct communication with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So, I suppose in the beginning it takes a leap of faith. But you could also think of your teachers. Some may be still alive, so you could think of them. And even if they're not physically present with you, they're somewhere in the world, and they have this compassion and love for all living beings, including you. And they have this dedication to helping every being, including you. So that might be more helpful. So try both and see what works, what's helpful for you. And then if we open our hearts to the compassion and the love and the wisdom and the guidance of the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, our teachers, all these objects of refuge, so that can be very comforting and supporting, take us out of our feeling of loneliness. And it also strengthens our refuge. When when we're not experiencing problems, when things are going well and we're happy and healthy, maybe at those times our refuge isn't so strong, you know. But when we face problems and difficulties, it's like those are the times when we feel, I need help. And if we turn for help to our objects of refuge, then, we're strengthening that attitude, that state of mind of taking refuge, making it stronger and deeper and more familiar. And taking refuge is something virtuous. Yeah, it's a virtuous state of mind, virtuous practice to do. And so this is a way in which we are transforming our suffering, our problem, into something virtuous, something that will bring us further along the path and be the cause of future happiness, positive experiences. And then the third is to remember impermanence. So this can be helpful for various reasons. One is with regard to the suffering you're experiencing. Yeah, these painful feelings, thoughts, and so on. Just to remember that they're not permanent. They're not going to be there forever. They're going to end at some point. And because, we do have this tendency, I don't know if you've noticed it, but when we're going through some problem or difficulty, there might be this thought in the mind, oh, this is going to be here forever. I'm going to feel this way forever. It's never going to end. Yeah, have you ever noticed that? That's grasping at permanence. That's an example of that distorted conception that we were looking at earlier. Grasping at permanence. This is permanent. It's going to be there forever. I'm never going to be free of this. It's rubbish. It's not true. So if that kind of thought pops up in your mind, don't buy into it. Don't believe it. It's a lie. Your mind is lying to you. Yeah. So recognize that, and remember the teachings on impermanence. Buddha talked about impermanence again and again and again. And it's in those 5 remembrances that we looked at. So it's simply the nature of things, the reality of things, the truth of things. And it's not just a Buddhist idea. It's also confirmed by science. All material things are changing all the time. Our mind is changing all the time. So contemplating that can give some relief, can be helpful. And it's transforming your suffering into the path, because by contemplating impermanence, that's a virtuous practice. That's one of the practices taught by the Buddha. It's very beneficial. It's part of the path. We do have to realize at some point in time, we do have to get the realization of impermanence, the direct realization of impermanence. That's part of the path. And so the more we contemplate impermanence, the more we're familiarizing ourselves with impermanence and creating the causes to eventually gain that direct realization. So I'm kind of going through a lot of different points because everyone is different, and some people might relate better to one practice than to another. For some people, refuge is perfect, just what they need. Other people might have some doubts or uncertainty, and that's something that doesn't come so easily. But for them, one of these other practices might work, like impermanence, because that isn't a matter of faith. That isn't like, is it true or not? I don't know. I mean, you just look at science. It's a fact. So you can try these different techniques, and if you find one that doesn't work, then put that aside and try another one. Hopefully you'll find one that does work. The next one is karma. And this may not be helpful in every case. I was thinking, it might happen that if somebody's thinking, oh, this loved one, this wonderful person, this, whatever, family member, child or friend or whatever passed away. and I'm suffering so much because of that. So if this is the result of karma, does it mean my bad karma killed that person? Is it because of my karma that that person died? See, people do sometimes have that thought, and that's wrong. Okay, so if your mind comes up with that question or doubt, know that it's wrong. It's not true. Each person has their own karma, and we have karma to be born in the body and the life that we have, and the karma we have to be born also determines how long we have to live. Okay, so we have a certain amount of time determined by our karma, and other factors can get involved with that, and cause an untimely death. But they do say in the teachings that the karma we have to be born in a particular body and life and situation also includes a length of time that we have to be in this life, in this situation. And so someone who dies, it's their karma, it's the result of their karma and not our karma. But if that person was important to us, and we feel a lot of sorrow, a lot of sadness when they're gone, that would be our karma. Yeah, we have the karma to lose someone and have that experience of grief over that loss. So that would be our karma. And the whole point of contemplating karma is to strengthen and deepen our conviction in karma, so that we become more determined to live our life in accordance with karma, avoid creating negative actions, non-virtuous actions, which are the cause of suffering, and create virtuous actions as much as we can. Those are the cause of happiness. So that's the whole point of thinking about karma, is to become more convinced so that we live our life in a better way. But I think it can also help, thinking of karma can also help us to avoid anger, like in the case of someone who's died, angry that they died, this isn't right, this isn't fair, why should this happen to me, and so on. So if we have strong belief in karma, then that will answer that question. There's a reason why this happened. It's not unfair. And also blaming. That's something else that can happen. Trying to find someone to blame and then being angry at them and wanting to take revenge on them and so on. So, again, if we can understand things in terms of karma, then we understand there is a cause created by each individual for the unpleasant things that happen to us. So thinking in terms of karma can help us avoid those kind of reactions and help us be more calm and accepting. But that doesn't mean, like, for example, if the loved one was murdered, that you just say, okay, well, no problem, it was his bad karma, I'm not going to report it to the police. So I mean, if there's a murderer running around, it's important that the police are informed of that, because otherwise that person might commit other murders, cause other people to suffer, and themselves as well. So they do need to be restrained and dealt with in wise and skillful ways. So if you don't find thinking in terms of karma helpful, you don't have to do that one. You can skip that one and try something else. So the next one is compassion. So so when we are facing a problem like the loss of a loved one, then we can use that situation to contemplate all the other people in the world who have a similar experience, who have had it in the past, who may be having it right now in this moment, and again in the future. Yeah, this is an experience everyone goes through, losing loved ones. It's a part of life, a part of samsara. So we can, think that I'm not the only one experiencing this kind of grief. Everyone goes through it at times in their life. And now I know what it's like. Now I can understand how they are suffering. And I really would like to free them from their suffering. And so then that can strengthen our compassion and our bodhicitta, our determination to get to enlightenment, become a Buddha, so that we can help all those other beings. And then Tonglen, taking and giving. This is connected to compassion. So this involves generating strong compassion for at least one sentient being, but you could also do it for a group of sentient beings who are suffering, and you generate strong compassion and the wish to remove their suffering. And then you imagine, there's different ways of doing it, but the usual way is imagine the suffering of that person coming out of them in the form of smoke or fog or pollution or whatever. And you take it into yourself, and you imagine at your heart, in the center of your chest, is a sort of a lump, that a blob that represents your self-centeredness. This practice is mainly used to overcome the self-centered attitude, which is a big obstacle to developing bodhicitta. And so when the suffering of the other person comes into you, you imagine it absorbing into this blob of your self-centered mind and eliminating it. It becomes non-existent. And so does the suffering. It's not that you take on that suffering and then you're sitting there with it, with all that suffering, but you imagine it all disappearing, both the suffering you've taken on and this self-centered attitude that is a hindrance to your practice. So that's the taking part. And then the giving part is you imagine your good energy, your good karma, your good qualities, your happiness, all the good stuff you have in your life. And you send that out to the one who is suffering in the form of light, and it transforms into whatever they need in order to be happy and fulfilled. So that's, for some people love that practice. I've met and heard of people who right from the beginning, they really connect with that practice and they like doing it. Maybe they were familiar with it from past lives and just picking up where they left off. Other people feel some resistance to that, and it's like, it is actually an advanced practice. It's not something that's normally taught to beginners. So you might need to be more familiar with compassion and love and bodhicitta, generate those states of mind more before you're ready to do the Tonglen practice, taking and giving practice. Okay, the last point, this should have been a separate point. I don't know what happened here. It all got squished into one. But it was, yeah. So the last point is contemplate Shantideva's advice. This is a verse from Shantideva's text, the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, where he says, if it can be remedied, why be unhappy about it? If it cannot be remedied, what is the use of being unhappy about it? I love this one. I find this so helpful. So when you're facing some problem, some difficulty, some painful experience, the mind can just get so caught up in the unhappiness and just keep going around and around and around with the same kind of thoughts like, oh, this is awful. Oh, this is terrible. Oh, when is this going to end? And that's not helpful. So this advice is very practical and realistic. You ask yourself, okay, there's this problem. It's unpleasant. can I do something about it? Is there something that I can do to deal with this problem, be free of this problem? And sometimes there is. Yeah, sometimes there are things you can do. Of course, the things you do should be ethical and helpful. Um, yeah, not unwise, unskillful. So sometimes there are things you can do about a problem. And so if there's something you can do it. Yeah, don't just let your mind swim or drown in all this unhappiness. Do something about it. Like, just to give an example, when my mother passed away, I won't go into all the details, but anyway, for the first 24 hours, I was completely okay and clear and focused on doing things, things that would be helpful, things that needed to be done, and so on. And then after about 24 hours, it hit me. Yeah, the grief hit me. And it was just like being hit with a ton of bricks. It's really like, whoo. And I had a real hard time doing any kind of practice at that point in time. And so I thought of calling a friend, one nun that have known for many years, and I know she's experienced a lot of grief in her life, and she's very kind and loving. So I called her up, and we had this nice conversation. She was very helpful, very kind, and giving advice, making little jokes, getting me to laugh. So by the end of that conversation, I felt much better. I mean, it's still painful, but at least I could, manage and do some practice. Yeah. So, if we use our intelligence, we can often find solutions, at least temporary solutions to our problems. So put our energy into those. And then the second part says, if it cannot be remedied, what is the use of being unhappy about it? So in some cases, it may not be possible to eliminate a problem. So for example, in the case of grief, if your mind is saying, I want this person back, like Sukotami, I want my baby back. I want my baby to come to life again. Well, yeah, that's just not possible. That's asking for something impossible. And so if you contemplate that and you come to accept, okay, yeah, I can't have that. That is impossible. Then Shanti Deva says, what's the use of being unhappy about it? Better to accept it. And it may take time, of course. It may take time to get to that point of acceptance. But once you do, your mind will be calmer. And I put here the serenity prayer because I think the serenity prayer is similar to this idea. If we make a secular version of that, it says, may I have the serenity to accept what can't be changed, the courage to change what can be changed, and the wisdom to know the difference. Something like that. So I think that's similar to this, that there are things that can be changed. And if so, let's do it. Let's make those changes, do those things. On the other hand, some things can't be changed. And it's better to just accept that. And then to have the wisdom to be able to know the difference. So these are some remedies or tools, methods that we can use when we face a problem such as grief. And if we use any of these, then these are practices. These are Dharma practices, virtuous practices. So using them means we're increasing our familiarity with them, making them more habitual, more familiar. And we are creating virtue because these are virtuous practices. And especially if we do it with a good motivation, like bodhicitta motivation, then these practices become the cause not just of relieving our suffering, but the cause of progressing along the path and getting closer to enlightenment. Let's just do a little bit of meditation on one of these. Compassion, I think, is, for most people, I hope it's not too difficult to do, and you can sort of quickly get a result from it. Let's just do a little bit of meditation on compassion and see how that could be used to transform a problem into the path. So make yourselves comfortable. Try to have your back straight. Let your shoulders relax. Let all the parts of your body relax. Don't be too relaxed, such that you fall asleep. And a way to prevent that is keeping your eyes open a little, so there's some light coming in. Then bring to mind a problem. It could be grief or some other problem, something that's causing you unhappiness, maybe some anxiety. You don't have to choose your biggest problem. You could choose something small and easier to work with. To let that problem come into the space of your mind. And see if you can notice how your mind reacts to it. If there's resistance, if there's feeling like, oh, I don't want this. Why do I have to have this? I wish it would go away. And it's certainly fine to do things about problems, like take medicine if we're sick. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But it's also skillful to use problems in the path, to make the problem part of our spiritual practice. And one way of doing that that's not terribly difficult is use it to increase our compassion. So a way to do that is simply think, I'm not the only person having this kind of problem. There are many others. So there may be people you know who have a similar problem, or you can just use your imagination and think about all across the world, among the 8 billion human beings, there are many others who have a similar, either the same problem or something similar to it. And we have to be careful that that thought doesn't make us feel depressed or hopeless. We don't want to go there. Remember that problems and suffering are impermanent, not permanent. And everyone, every being, has the ability, the potential to become free of all problems and suffering. The Buddha did this himself, and he taught the way to do it. And it's definitely possible for every single one of us. And everyone will eventually become free of all problems. And compassion is a very important quality to develop on the path, to bring ourselves closer to enlightenment. But it also has a lot of benefits we can experience here and now. It's good for our health, good for our mind, good for our relationships. So when we have a problem, we can use the problem to increase our compassion by thinking of others who have a similar problem and connecting with them, thinking, I understand how they feel. I understand what they're going through because I'm going through that myself right now. And then generate the feeling, or at least the thought, how wonderful it would be if everyone could be free of this problem. Nobody had to experience it. Make all those people, all those beings, be free of this problem. And if you're comfortable to do so, you can go one step further and generate the aspiration to become awakened, to become a Buddha, so that you can help all other beings be free of their suffering, their problems. So once you learn these techniques and get familiar with them, then it doesn't take very long. Just in a couple of minutes, you can bring them to mind and experience this instant transformation of your mind from being unhappy, miserable, maybe sorry for yourself, self-pitying, into something much more positive and virtuous and beneficial.